One of the most useful things to do is to find the SQL statements that take the longest or are the most resource intensive to run in your application. These are the statements that you need to target for performance tuning. By using the $SQL stats view, you can use a query like the one shown on the slide to look at all of the SQL statements in Oracle's shared SQL area and see their execution statistics to tell you which statements are the most expensive to run. The $SQL stats view contains information like the number of times a statement is executed, the total amount of elapsed time spent executing the statement, the total amount of CPU time the statement has used, the total number of buffered gets, which are the logical IOs, and the total number of disk reads. You can get a lot of this same information from the $SQL view, but Oracle is now recommending that you use the $SQL stats view as it's supposed to be a little bit more efficient. By taking all of these values and dividing by the number of executions, you can get the average values for each one of these metrics. So you can see on average what statements take the most elapsed time, what statements take the most CPU. As you can see, I am limiting this version of the query to the top 25 results, but you could adjust this to whatever makes sense for you. Sometimes I'll also add an additional where clause to only look at statements that have executed, say, 10 times or more, so I can filter out any one-off statements that may be hanging around the shared SQL area. Finally, as you see, this version of the query is being sorted by the averaged elapsed time, so these are the statements that are taking the longest to execute on average. The sort order you use, though, is one of the primary places where you want to vary this query. For example, you can sort the data by the most number of logical reads per execution, or the most CPU time per execution, and this would give you the statements that are the most resource intensive in the database. These statements that are using a lot of resources on each execution probably also have some of the highest average elapsed times to execute, so these are definitely statements you want to target in your performance tuning efforts. You can also sort by the total amount of logical reads or the total amount of CPU being used. Since this is a total amount, these are, after all, the statements that are using the most resources overall on your database server. You may have a statement that uses a moderately high amount of resources on each execution, but doesn't make the top 25 list above. But due to the frequency of execution, this statement is overall using a lot of resources. And again, you want to get these statements onto your performance tuning list. Finally, I like to sort by the number of times that a statement has been executed. If you notice that you have a query that is executing very frequently, but the data that this query retrieves is static, then there might be an opportunity to cache some of this data in the application rather than running the query over and over again. What's useful about the query on the prior slide and all these different variations is that you could probably take this query and run it in your production Oracle database today, and you probably would find some performance tuning opportunities for your application. What you do want to remember is that this query is looking at statements that are currently in the shared SQL area, so this is just looking at statements in a snapshot of time. How often are statements cached out of your shared SQL area to where they would not show up in this query? That depends on a number of factors, like the amount of memory devoted to the shared SQL area and how many distinct SQL statements are run against your database. The time any individual SQL statement spends in the shared SQL area could range from several minutes to several hours. Also, if a statement is executed only once, it will be cached out much quicker than a statement that's being executed frequently because Oracle is managing this cache using a least recently used algorithm. Just know that statements can and do age out of the cache. So if you run this query at 10 a.m. in the morning, you probably won't see statements from your batch process that executed at 2 a.m. Also, if you run this query at 10 a.m. and at 4 p.m., you may get somewhat different results because the workload at those times might be different. The answer here is just to run this query several times throughout the day, and even at night if you have a batch process. As you do, you'll see some patterns start to emerge about what statements take the longest to run and consume the most resources. And this is where you want to start your performance tuning efforts.